is the second installation on our video on World War I technology. Hopefully this one will upload smoother than the last. So we're picking up at gases. Gases were first used in World War I. They were really used to demoralize troops. They injured more than they killed. They made war much more psychological, much more scary, took away a lot of that glory that we discussed earlier. In fact, the 1898, the Hague Declaration concerning asphyxiating gases condemned ever using gases, but they were used anyways. For the first time in the Battle of Ypres in 1915. I know some of you guys covered that battle in the step 1 of your project. And that was when they used chlorine gas. Phosgene gas was also used. It was prepared by French chemists, and first used by the French in 1915, where the Germans first used gas in 1915. Actually, they tried to use it 3 months earlier, but that gas liquefied and didn't work. Mustard gas was first used by the Germans in July of 1917. It was heavier than air, and it settled to the ground and could remain active for days or even months in the soil. It caused people to blister, to have sore eyes, and to vomit. Sometimes it took 4 or 5 to weeks to die. Now, even though there were over 92,000 deaths from gas, there was over 1.3 million casualties. And sometimes this gas was colorless. Phosgene gas was colorless. It smelled like moldy hay, so it was hard to even detect it many times. And hold on a second. Aurora. Some problems with gas are, imagine using it, and then the wind changes direction, and you end up gassing yourself. Not pleasant, right? Another problem is, remember how I mentioned it would sink into the ground and it was often colorless or odorless. Sometimes people thought, hey, here's a cleared trench. I can take, a defensive spot here, and they would be gassing themselves. Because if it was remained active for weeks, you might not have known if it was gassed earlier. Now pause this. After I ask you, what do you think the first cotton pads were soaked in to prevent from being gassed? Pause it and write your answer. Pause it. Did you write your answer down? What do you think they dipped cotton pads in to prevent from the complications of gas? Pause it! It was urine! Yes, and that sounds gross, but if that prevented some of the discomforts of gas, you would do it too. Sometimes they also would dip socks or handkerchiefs in bicarbonate of soda, which is the way the British say baking soda. Now, Airfare is really interesting because Airfare was only invented right prior to World War I. It was still very new. And they used it originally for reconnaissance missions. In other words, to fly low and slow over the enemy's trenches and to see, how are their trenches laid out? Where is their artillery? How many tanks do they have? They later used it for fighting and bombing. Aces. The U.S.'s most famous ace was Eddie Rickenbacker, but the most famous one of all was the German Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen. He was originally a cavalryman and a recon officer, but there wasn't really use for cavalry as much in World War I, so he left the trenches and became an airman. The life expectancy of a World War I pilot was only several weeks. He outlasted many of them, but he did die in the air. So here's like a reconnaissance. It shows you how dangerous it was as they flew over. You're going to get shot at. Sorry, I was distracted by a 4-year-old there for a second. Fighter planes were legitimately just planes where they would throw things off the plane. Like lawn darts and nails and bricks. They would literally take bricks and chuck them at troops below them. Because they didn't have they weren't made fighter planes yet. So then someone had this ingenious idea, let's take a machine gun and mount it to the front of the plane. So as you fly it, you can also shoot. I know that looks like some guy on top of a hamburger, but that's supposed to be a plane. But there was a problem with this. As they shot, sometimes while they were flying and they were looking, oh, there's some troops below, or that's another plane. These planes fighting against each other were called dogfights. Well, the problem was they began to shoot off their own propeller, which is not good because usually when you shoot off your propeller, the plane crashes, and usually when the plane crashes, you die. So that's not good. Not at all. So the way to solve this problem was the German Fokker found a way to synchronize it so when the bullets shot, it was between blades, but that Fokker had a tendency to peel off the top wing during flight, and that's not good either. And this is just a little side note here. The top 20 aces of World War I, 12 of them were killed in action. That's KIA, you should know this, stands for killed in action, just so you see how dangerous it was. Another dangerous job in World War I was a flamethrower. Now, this picture is not from World War I, but I wanted you to see the color a little bit. Flamethrowers actually were not original to World War I. They go back way back to the 5th century BC, but they were used in much greater power, let's say, in World War I. And they were important because they could clear out trenches. They were deadly. Because think about it, not only could you kill people with it, but if someone saw you with a can of gas on your back, that was a target, and you wouldn't last long. So the Flammenwerfer is a German flamethrower. The Klein Flammenwerfer was the small, personal flamethrower, and the Gross Flammenwerfer was the big flamethrower. Once again, check the calendar for the assignment. All right, and I'll see you next class.